In this video, I'm teaching you how to not lose $10,000, $15,000, or $20,000 when buying your home in Washington State. Welcome back to Seattle Living 101, and today we are talking about home buying 101 in Washington State. And we're going to be covering everything that you need to know from A to Z. Now, let's start with step one. Most people think step one is run off and get pre-approved with some lender. Let me stop you right here and right now. Step one is sitting down with your husband and wife and saying, hey, is this something that we can even afford? I'm not talking about saving up for your down payment or closing cost. I'm talking about the fact that home maintenance costs are usually between 1% and 4% of your overall purchase price per year. That means if you're buying a house for $500,000, you should expect to spend every year between $5,000 and $20,000. Now, $20,000 will be in the extreme case scenarios. Let me give you a live example. I bought a house last year for $977,000, and we spent 3% our first year on maintenance. Why? Because my kitchen flooded on the day of closing. Woohoo! Had to tear out the whole kitchen. We found black mold. We found rotted supports. Anyways, long story short, we remodeled that house. Then our second house on the property as well, we had to tear out the kitchen as well because it had lead-based paint. It was shipping. We couldn't allow anybody to live there consciously, right? So we had to tear out that kitchen as well. We spent $30,000 on those two projects. This year alone, we're budgeting for another $30,000 to $40,000 thanks to my wife's honey-do lists. Just kidding. For example, I started adding a third bedroom to our house where we live, and when I uncovered the ceiling a little bit, we found out that we now have a roof leak. Things like this are bound to come up no matter which inspector you hire to do the inspection on your home. Especially in the Pacific Northwest where we have evergreen trees everywhere, and if you don't maintain your roof throughout the year, roof leaks are bound to happen. Now, I'm not trying to scare you off from buying a home. The point in what I'm saying is, besides saving up for your down payment, make sure that you either budget for or already have an additional savings between 1% and 4% of your purchasing price. Again, if you're purchasing for $500,000, between $5,000 to $20,000 should be saved up just for home maintenance. Now, after you sit down with your partner and determine that you are financially able to buy a home, the second step is getting pre-approved. Now, when you get pre-approved, I typically like to go talk to my lender, Oleg Koch over at NFM Lending, usually no later than 6 months in advance because I want to budget for the tax year. And I call up my lender and I say, hey, what amount of money do I need to show as a profit on my tax returns in order to afford this type of a home? And he gives me the numbers, then I file my taxes and we purchase our home. This is what I would recommend you do at least a year in advance, just so you know where you need to be with your tax returns in order to get pre-approved for the home that you desire. Now, after talking to a lender, he will help you identify the different down payment options available to you. In my case, I never put more than 10% down on purchasing a home. Most of my properties were bought with 5% down. So you don't need 20% down in order to buy a home, but if you do have 20%, it will help lower your monthly payment a bit more. My personal preference and what I've been practicing the last 8 years of being a realtor is instead of putting 20% down on a home, I save up 5%, purchase a home, live in it, move out a year later, because you have to live in it for a year, spend another 5% down, purchase a home, live in it, move out a year later, and I repeated the process for the last 5 years. However, it can be really annoying to move every single year. So just keep that in mind. But the upside for me outweighs the negative. The fact that I can purchase a property every single year, put 5% down, and as long as you can afford the monthly payment, this is a great way to build up wealth through owning real estate. Now, step 3 is find a realtor. Ding, 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 ding. Like myself, yes, people, I am a realtor here at Seattle Living 101. That's what I do. Share everything about Washington State for you in hopes that you will use me as your agent too. Anyways, which many of you do. All of you do. Use me as your agent. Move to Washington State. So let's talk about finding a realtor. This has to be somebody that you click with. Not everybody that I interview or that interviews me we end up working together. Sometimes it's just not the right fit. You got to be comfortable with that person. You have to trust them because they're helping you out with one of the biggest financial decisions of your life. Most people don't walk around just dropping $500,000 here and there, right? This is most likely one of the biggest purchases that you'll ever make in your life, and you want to make sure that you have a trusted professional that knows what they're doing. Now, one thing I want to tell you is in the real estate industry, years don't get you experience. Deals do. There are agents out there that say, I've been 30 years in the business, and they ended up doing maybe one deal per year. And then there are agents like myself who maybe aren't 30 years in the business, 8 years in the business, and have done well over 100 deals. You pick what you want. When you go to brain surgery, do you want to go to a doctor that says he's been in the business for 80 years and has done one surgery? Or do you want to go to a doctor that's been in the business maybe 2 years, but has done 50 surgeries, right? Just as an example for you. So make sure it's somebody that you trust. Make sure that they actually have experience in doing this and that they know what they're talking about. And when you sit down with your realtor, you're going to go over what your wants and needs are. Literally make a list. One side should say wants, one side should say needs. And off of this list, this will be your 10 commandments, so to say, on buying a home. Don't deviate from them. Now, focus on your need. These are the things that you absolutely have to have in the home that you buy, or you know what, there's no deal, right? These are the things that are non-negotiables. And make it super clear to yourself and to your agent, you have to have these things. Now, on your wants side, this is gonna be your, I want gray walls, I want some laminate flooring, typically more cosmetic stuff. Because keep in mind, when buying a home, I always say buying a home is like marriage, right? There's no perfect home out there. You just pick what you're willing to live with and you make it work.
What?
Yeah. I always use that example. Baby, you're perfect.
Is that the case with me?
Yes, absolutely. And the case with me. You're perfect, sweetie. You're perfect. Yes. Close the door. Anyways, yeah, nobody's perfect. So, my point is, we joke. My point is, you have to figure out what your wants and needs are, and keep in mind, guys, don't be too picky when buying a home. There are many buyers that I worked with before where they allowed their wants to get into the way of purchasing their home. Oh my gosh, I really wanted vinyl flooring. This has carpet. That's something that can be changed, right? That's something that you could save up $4,000 or $5,000 for and put in some vinyl flooring. But as far as the location goes, maybe the type of house that you want, those things typically can't be changed. If you like a specific architectural style, things of that nature, those you would put on your needs list. One of the other things that often goes on your needs list is the layout of the home. Some homes have really funky layouts, and it would probably cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars to remodel, tear everything out, and redo it. So you have to take that into consideration when looking for your perfect home. Now, once you get those things in order and you know exactly what you're willing to live with and what you're not willing to live with, the next step is actually looking at some properties. Most of the times your agent, like myself, I will set you up on a home search where as soon as we get a new property that hits the market, you will get an email with it immediately. And don't delay in looking at properties. However, when you see a property hit the market and you're looking at it on any of these other sites, or maybe on the email list that I send you, one of the things you have to look for is, how does this match up to my needs list? Is it in the location that I want? Does it have a similar layout to what I want? How are the schools there? Am I okay living here? Because I can tell you right away, if one of your needs on there is not checked, don't even waste time to go look at it. Every time you waste an hour or two to go look at a home, drive there, is the time that you could be spending looking at properties that you actually know, like, and know that you actually want to live there. So don't waste your time and looking at properties that you already have the gut feeling that this probably won't work for us because it's just going to be a waste of time and resources. Another thing to consider when we're talking about your wants and needs is what your future plans with the property are. Is your goal to keep the property? Like I always recommend, I never recommend you sell anything unless you absolutely have to. Is your goal to keep the property and maybe rent it out and become a landlord, right? Or is your goal to sell it later on and cash out on some of the equity that grew in that property? Because sometimes you might be faced with the decision saying, hey, we have this $500,000 home further south, maybe in Renton, not our ideal location. Maybe you're looking in Bellevue, which is like a prestigious area, right? And the same home in Bellevue is listed at $700,000, and there's 3 offers on it, and you have to overpay another 50 grand, right? So $250,000 difference. However, much better location. And one thing I can tell you is when it comes to future growth, Bellevue will appreciate faster than your home further south in Renton, which is where I used to live, right? So when looking at this, yeah, it's 250 grand more that you have to pay. Yes, your bills are going to be a bit higher with your mortgage payment, right? But future growth, your house in Bellevue will appreciate much faster and in greater amounts than your house further south in Renton. So that's yet one more thing for you to consider, but I highly recommend you take a look at what do you want to do in the future? What's important to you? Now, if you just want to live there forever, if this is your forever home, then location will probably be the single most decision-making factor in your home search. On to step 5. Step 5 is writing an offer. After you identify the perfect home that you want to write an offer on, you of course need to know the price, how much you are willing to offer, and make sure to talk to your lender ahead of time so that you know, hey, for $700,000, here's how much our monthly payment is going to be. For $750,000, here's what it's going to be. And for $800,000, here's what it's going to be. Because the market does tend to ebb and flow. And depending on where you're buying a home, you might be hitting the spring market where you could see multiple offers and you need to overbid on a property in order to get it. You need to know what you're willing to afford as a monthly payment and what's the maximum amount of money that you're willing to offer. Now, after you figure out the price, the second thing you want to figure out is the expiration date. Typically, we want to give the sellers no more than 1 day to look at your offer, review it, and decide if they want to accept it, counter it, or reject it. So that's a simple fact. The third part is you want to figure out your closing date. Now, the closing process from the time that your offer gets accepted to the time that you move in can take as little as 21 days or as long as typically 30 to 45 days. 45 days is a rare stretch. I haven't seen that in many, many years. Typically, it's 30 days. So after you identify a closing date, expiration date, and the price, you also want to figure out how much earnest money you're going to put down. Now, this goes back to my first question in the beginning where I talk about you not losing $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 when buying a home here in Washington State. The earnest money is a deposit that you make within 2 days of the seller accepting your offer. This deposit is at risk. Now, for those of you wondering, is it a part of your down payment? Yes. So if you're putting $50,000 down, the first 2 days you might put $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 down. We'll go over that. And then you bring the rest of the money to the closing table. So this deposit is at risk. What do I mean by that? This deposit is held by the escrow company. The escrow company is the third-party company that essentially transfers the ownership of the title and they handle all the money. So you make the deposit with them and they have to abide by the contract. Now, you can get that deposit back under a few circumstances. Number one, the inspection. You have to sit down and identify with your realtor how long of an inspection period you need to inspect the house. Typically in Washington State, I see 5 days as a common number. So you have 5 days to inspect the house, hire inspectors, hire contractors, whoever you want to take a look at the house and see if this is something that you want to buy. Now, sometimes people waive inspections. Essentially what that means is, hey, Mr. Seller, I like your home so much, there's 5 other offers and I'm not even going to do an inspection. I don't recommend doing that, but sometimes people are forced to do that. If this is the home of your dreams and you really like it, you might be willing to take the risk. Now, if you do the inspection and you decide that this home is not for you, or maybe the seller doesn't want to fix all the items that you requested, you can back out and get your earnest money. However, after the inspection, if you're just like, you know what, I don't want the house anymore, you will end up losing that $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, whatever amount of money you put down as your earnest money. You will lose it if you just decide to change your mind just like that. During the inspection period is really your primary time that you have to second guess yourself, sleep on it, and decide if this is something that you want to do. Now, after the inspection, we go to the appraisal. Now, the appraisal is essentially a process where your lender hires a third-party company to appraise the house. And their goal is to find out is your house worth what you're trying to pay for it? Now, during the appraisal process, this is a third-party appraisal. It's a non-biased person that comes out there who's qualified in identifying the value of the home. If the house was worth $500,000 and you offered $550,000, they have to figure out, is it worth $550,000? Now, typically, if your agent like myself writes up the offer properly, if you offered $550,000 and the appraiser says it's worth $525,000, then what happens is we go into a negotiation phase with the seller where we negotiate the price down, and that's what I'm good at doing in the event that happens. And we just have to explain to the seller that, hey, we're your best choice. Let's negotiate the property down because you would have had this issue with any other buyer, right? Now, the seller is not obligated to accept. So if the deal falls apart at that stage, you get your earnest money back. However, if the seller accepts, or if we move forward in general, let's say the house appraises higher, right? You don't have to pay more. You just simply move forward with the agreed upon price and just be happy about the equity that you have in the house. But if the deal falls apart, you get your earnest money back. Now, after the appraisal, again, if you just decide to say, you know what, honey, I don't want this house anymore. Again, that's where you can lose your earnest money deposit. And sometimes in a competitive scenario where you have multiple offers, your earnest money deposit might be $50,000 on a $500,000 home. You decide how high you want to go and how much you want to risk, but we have seen sometimes people offer that much to show the seller how serious they are about purchasing the home. So after you make an offer, after you do the inspection, after you pass the appraisal, then essentially you coast to closing. And like I said, this whole process typically takes no more than 30 days. And about 5 days before closing, you're able to come through the house one more time, take a look at everything and make sure it's in the same condition as when you had seen it at first, because the seller is obligated by law to present it in the same condition that you saw it the first time. That means if there's a new broken window, the seller has to replace it. If there's a roof leak, the seller has to take care of it. And after your final walkthrough, you wire over the money, and when the day of closing comes is when you get your keys. Ta-da! Congrats, the house is now yours. Now, I know this may have been a lot of information for you. However, if you're looking to break it down, get some more information, or talk about you possibly moving over here to Washington State, make sure to book a Zoom call with me or shoot me a call at the number below, and I'd be happy to help you make that smooth move over to the Seattle area. Okay, next.